of his clients.
Kim Whaley joins me now. She is a CBS News legal analyst and commentator. Thanks so much, Kim, for being with us. So prosecutors say that they have a recording of Avenatti threatening Nike. If that, in fact, is such the case, that there is this tangible evidence, is he likely to face jail time?
Well, tangible evidence like that is known as direct evidence, as distinct from something called circumstantial evidence. Non-lawyers seem to think there's a difference in value, but not both of them count in court. But direct evidence is, I know it was raining because I saw it rain. And that's what we have here. We have an audio tape. So I think he's in pretty hot water at this point. And I think given that by estimates, we're talking almost 100 years of potential jail time if you max out the sentencing guidelines, he's likely to be behind bars at some point going forward.
I mean, there was a time when you looked up and every TV screen you saw Michael Avenatti. How will that high profile that he had as an attorney play into his actual prosecution, you think?
Well, we've seen a lot of high-profile people, including most recently Paul Manafort, go through the criminal justice system and appear before federal judges for sentencing. I would suspect a federal judge with Michael Avenatti will be very careful to ensure that he gets the same level of fairness and due process that someone without his fame has. Of course, the wrinkle here is the boss that's in charge of his prosecution is Bill Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, and his boss is really Mr. Avenatti's arch nemesis coming forward, at least to this point, which is the President of the United States. But I have confidence in the judicial process and Article 3 judges' independence that this will be a fair proceeding for him, even if there are pieces of it that he personally might not like how they go.
Well, how do these charges impact Avenatti's clients?
Well, I think if I were a client of Michael Avenatti's, the first thing I would do would be to fire him and hire another lawyer. And then I would want to look into whether his representation of me had some problems. I mean, lawyers not just have an obligation to do their job, but they also have an obligation to do it with the utmost ethics because they are really officers of the court. It's how our justice system, our civil and criminal justice system functions is through high levels of integrity for lawyers. So I think that's extremely important. I would want to know, listen, is there something shady going on? Of course, he's innocent until proven guilty, but is there something shady going on that I need to pay attention to with respect to my own interests?
So in terms of a defense strategy, what kind of options might be available to Avenatti right now?
This is not a situation like what we've seen in connection with the investigation, say, of the president and his cohorts. That is, there's not a benefit to Mr. Avenatti to cooperating in sort of getting other people, the investigation going with respect to other people, at least as far as we know. So he doesn't have a whole lot of options. He's going to hire some very, very good lawyers, and optimally, I suppose, he will try to make a deal that would minimize his incarceration, potential incarceration time, short of some ability to cooperate, give the government information in exchange for a lesser jail time or lesser charges.
All right, we'll continue to follow it closely. Kim Whaley. Kim, thanks very much.
My pleasure.
President Trump and many of his supporters